All right, welcome back. Today we are going to take it easy. We've learned a lot so far. So for this lesson, we will just learn maybe one or two things about loops. So today, let's look at these flavors that we have here. We have an array called flavors, and we have vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, mint, banana, and rubber. Yeah, rubber is a great flavor. If you've never tried it, you should definitely try it. I'm just kidding. Anyways, so we have a bunch of flavors here. And what if I want to create a loop and just print all of these flavors one by one? How would we do that? So the way we learned is we should initiate a variable, and then we have a while loop. And then this while loop, we want it to iterate through the whole list. So how we can do that is by doing when I is still smaller than the length of flavors. That way, I know that flavors, the length of flavors is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to be 6. So we're going to iterate from 0 to 5, which is 6 numbers. So it's going to iterate through the 6 flavors. And then I want to print the flavors. Which one? The one at the current index. And yep, and then that's pretty much it. I run it. Woo, I'm getting vanilla. Oh my God. How did that happen? It just kept saying vanilla. So the reason why that happened is because we forgot to add the I plus 1. So remember, this is the same as being I plus 1. So we forgot to increment I. This is a pretty common mistake that you might make. And yeah, it's not fun because I is 0, but it never increases. So you're going to be in this loop forever, right? So now that we fixed it, we run it. Now we have vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, mint, banana, and rubber. And then that's great. But what if you did this instead? Smaller or equal to, because you might think, okay, well, there's 6 flavors, then I want to stop at 6. So I is 0, and then I'll go all the way to 6. So what would happen is that you'll go index out of bound, because flavors 0 is vanilla, flavors 6, you might think it's rubber, but it's not. You're actually going out of bound. So what would happen, it says index out of range. What you want is 5. But sometimes we make the mistake. I mean, in some programming language, you count starting at 1 instead of 0, so it's very easy to make the mistake. What would happen if we make that mistake? Let's run it. All right, so we got all of these flavors, but then we make a mistake because our index goes out of range. So these are very common mistakes, and when you think about it, why is this so annoying? Well, it is quite annoying, which is why people, or maybe the Python developers, or people just write programming languages, they created a new keyword called a for loop. So this is a while loop, which is the most flexible loop you can do. Technically, you could do everything with a while loop, but the for loop abstracts certain things so that it's easier for you to do. What does a for loop look like? It looks like this. This is the syntax for it. First, we have the word for, which is kind of like while. And then what happens is you define a variable, let's say called item, in list. So you give it a list, and then what happens is that this item will take place of each item on the list. So what I mean by that is if your list was 1, 2, 3, then item, let's just say item will be equals to 1 for the first iteration of the loop. And then you could do something. Like for example, let's just say the action is print item. So you're going to be printing 1 on the first iteration, and then you're going to be going back, and then item now becomes 2. Why? Because it's the second element of the list. And then you're going to be printing 2, and then it's going to go back to the list. Now item becomes 3. Why? Because it's the next item on the list. So now item is 3, and then you're going to be printing it. And then this loop does something magical where once it knows you have finished iterating through the whole list, it will stop by itself. So that will prevent a lot of the bugs that we would make beforehand. So let's see in code. So first, I'll leave this here, this loop, and then I'll print something like for loop time. Maybe I will print here while loop time. Okay, let's just print a little bit. Okay, let's make it a little bit more fun. Maybe add a little bit of equal sign just for the texture. This is just me being fancy, but okay. This is for increased visibility. All right. Okay, so the while loop does this, and then we're gonna try to imitate this loop, but instead we're gonna be using the for loop. So we know that for, it starts with the for loop, and then what we wanna do is we wanna have one variable, and then that is a variable name that we define. It could be anything. Let's just call it flavor. Why? Because we're gonna be iterating on the whole list of flavors. So each time, so flavor will take on vanilla, and then it will take on strawberry, and then it will take on chocolate in flavors. Okay, so there you go. Let's just print flavor for now and see what happens. So for flavor and flavors, print flavor. It's easier to see which variable is which, okay? So let's run it. So in our loop time, there you go, that's it. That's all you need to do. So instead of these 4 lines, you only do 2 lines. And the power of for loops is that it knows that the list that you've given will end after 6 elements. So this for loop will only iterate through 6 of them. It's super great. Just for you to understand, this variable is the same as that variable. So for example, I could name it A, and then this would be A. All right, and then if we run it, right, it's the same thing. Let me just take out the while loop now, because you understand that. Actually, let me comment it out. I'll leave the code here, and then I'll comment it out like this. So the for loop is extremely easy to use because you know that this variable will take on every element within the list, and then you just want to do something with the list. So why would we use while loops when we could do for loops? Well, sometimes it's not as simple as iterating through the whole list. Maybe sometimes you want to do something more complicated. When you want to do something more complicated, we might use while loop. Like for example, let's have a problem where we have, let's say prices equals $4, $5, $6, $7, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to stop looping when the sum of the prices is bigger than 10, for example, right? So technically, while loops are quite easy to do. You could say sum of prices equals 0 first, and then while sum of prices is still smaller than 10, then you keep adding them, right? And then price sum, oops, you have an index. We totally forgot about the index. And then price of 1, you want to add that to your sum of prices. And then you return, what do we want to return? We want to print the sum prices, I guess. The sum prices, and also we'll just print I. Okay. All right, so first we have the flavors, and then now we're doing the sum prices. So let me comment this out. Okay, let's do this, the price stuff. Okay. Yeah, so then the price stuff, as you can see, we keep adding it while the sum prices is still smaller than 10. Let's just add another number, maybe like 10, 20. Okay. And then we want to increment 1. Okay, cool. So we get 15, and the reason why it's 15 is because we got 4, and then we add 5 to it, and then that's 9, but 9 is still smaller than 10, and then we add the last one, which is 6, and then we have the price. So it stops right here, right? But we can't really do that with for each unless you use something called break, which we will learn on the next lesson. But yeah, so while loops can do something more funky like that. But in for loops, you have to iterate through all of the items in the list no matter what. So you can't really do that with for loops. So that's why we use for loops. So while loops are more flexible, but they're more in some ways dangerous, because the more you can customize something, the more you have room for error. Here, it's more restricting, but it's a lot more safe because it's easier to use. Let me show you one more thing. It's a special command. It's called, let's see, let me erase all of this, run that. It's something called range. So I'm gonna write something here. Okay, so range is actually a special command. What kind of type is it? It's a type of range. Just to see it more easy, like for example, if I write range 4, it's gonna just give me the range of 0 to 4. But I could turn this into a list, and then it'll show me the list of numbers. What range is not technically a list, because it's more of a kind of a dynamic list where it generates new numbers as we go. So it doesn't store all of the numbers in memory. So we can do range like 1 billion and it would be fine. We can still use it. But if we turn into a list, I mean, I'm sure it's fine because we have a lot of memory on this computer or on their servers. Oh no, actually look, see, there's a memory error, right? Because what happens is you're trying to make a list of this size, okay? That means storing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like you can do it with a small number, right? So we have a list of 1,000 right here. But technically when you do range, what it does is it's actually an object. You could think of it as an object that keeps computing the next number as it goes so that it doesn't keep it in memory. And then you could iterate through that just like a list. Enough technical terms. If it doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. This is not what's important. What's important is that there is a fancy way of doing a for loop using ranges, which is this. For a in range 4, print a. All right, what do you think will happen here? So this will give us 0, 1, 2, 3. This is actually the same thing, almost the same thing as if we had I equals 0 while I is smaller than 4, print I. And then, oops, and then I plus equals 1. That's actually the same thing here. Or it's similar to for a in 0, 1, 2, 3, print a. So basically range 4 is a short form of saying a list starting from 0 to 4, not inclusive, which is this list. Which is why when I write list, I convert the range into a list, I get 0, 1, 2, 3. It's the same thing as this, right? So if I run that, it gives me the same thing. Because essentially, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a range which goes from 0 to 3 or 0 to 4, not inclusive. And then A will take on each of the element within the range. Same thing here, the A will take on an element, on each element within the list, right? So this is a super common way of just iterating through like a bunch of number. For example, if you want to do a loop 4 times, then you just write for A in range 4. And then maybe you could print hello. And then, yeah, so imagine if you want to say hello 4 times, then an easy way is to do a for loop and then give it a range in terms of the list. Range is also kind of special. There's different parameters. So technically it's start, end, not inclusive, and steps. I'll explain it real quick and then we'll explain it more in the next session. But the first number is what number do you want to start at? And then end is what number you want to end at, non-inclusively. And steps is how big of a step do you want each number to jump by. By default, this is 0. And then you can specify end. And then by default, this is 1. So technically, range of 4, let me turn it into a list so that's easier to see, is the same as range of start from 0, end at 4, and steps every one step, right? And then if I want to end it at 10, then I just change to end at 10. If I want to start at 4 and then end at 10, then I put 4 as the start number, right? If I want it to jump 2s, so I want 4, 6, 8, then I put 2 here. I could put 3, so now it jumps by 3. I could change this to 15 so that we can go further. So yeah, jumps by 3, ends at before 15, starts at 4, etc., etc. You could also go negative 1. Oops. It's not going to give you anything because if you start at 4, you'll never get to 15, right? So you'll have to do it the opposite way. Maybe 15, start at 15, end at 4, and then increment by -1. And then that's pretty much it. So these are new tools for you to do loops. I hope you use them. You could play around with them, try to be creative with them, and I'll see you on the next one.